Israel's possession of nuclear weapons is an open secret. It has a policy of deliberate ambiguity, never confirming nor denying its possession of nuclear bombs. But ever since 1986, the world has had incontrovertible proof of Israel's weapons program. That was after Israeli nuclear technician and whistleblower Mordecai Vanunu leaked photographs and documents to Britain's Sunday Times. For publication of those state secrets, Vanunu was kidnapped by the Mossad in Rome, brought back to Israel, and sentenced to 18 years in prison for treason and espionage. And more evidence came of Israel's nuclear capability in 2010. That was when The Guardian uncovered official documents from 1975 showing Israel had offered to sell the apartheid government in South Africa nuclear weapons in that same year. Then in 2023, the world got more confirmation when a junior Israeli minister threatened to nuke Gaza. And that led to the suspension of the cabinet minister for breaching the policy of deliberate ambiguity. Of course, you wouldn't get kicked out of cabinet for threatening genocidal actions against the Palestinians. That's perfectly fine. But if you mention nukes, you're in trouble. So Israel's nuclear capabilities are well known and recognized across the political spectrum. So it was surprising to read this earlier this week in a prominent BBC explainer. So the question in this sort of Q&A, so it's called Your Questions Answered on the Israel-Iran Conflict. Your voice, your news. I'm not sure why it says that. In the article, they have this question. Does Israel have nuclear weapons? The real answer is we don't know. They have not confirmed or denied the presence of a nuclear capability. It takes three components to have a nuclear weapon. First, uranium enriched to 60% purity. Second, the ability to build a warhead. And third, a way to deliver that warhead to a target. As it stands, there is no overt declaration by Israel on any form of nuclear capability. Now, this really brings to mind the famous quote. I think no one really knows quite who to ascribe it to, but it's, if one person says it's raining and another says it's not raining, then the journalist should look out the window and report the truth, not say, oh, these guys say this. Israel says it doesn't have a nuclear weapon. It's not even, Israel doesn't even deny it has a nuclear weapon. The answer is we don't know. What the hell is going on there? Is it, at least you can say, oh, Israel denies it has nuclear. Israel refuses to confirm or deny whether it has a nuclear weapon when everyone has incontrovertible proof it does. There are pictures. Right? In fact, a brave Israeli nuclear technician went to prison for 18 years for revealing to the world's press that they had this nuclear weapon. And now the BBC says, oh, yeah, we don't know. Who can say? There's another subtle problem with this explainer because it says this. In the third paragraph, it says that one of the three components needed for nuclear weapons is uranium enriched to 60% purity. Now, that's just false. The actual requirement is uranium enriched to 90% purity. So where has the 60% figure come from? Well, that's the purity Iran is thought to have achieved. So in the same post, which is supposed to be authoritative from the BBC, the journalist has now not only dramatically downplayed Israel's nuclear capabilities, but exaggerated Iran's. Now, after the outrage at that post, there has been a slight update to the article. Not by much, though. It now reads as this. Does Israel have nuclear weapons? There are estimates that it has about 90 nuclear warheads, but the real answer is we do not know. So that's sort of their, oh yeah, I suppose we should say it does actually have nuclear warheads, but we're also going to say we do not know. I suppose there the we do not know is about precisely how many nuclear warheads they have. And then they've updated this 60% points. They say it takes three components to have a nuclear weapon. First, uranium enriched to 90%. So they've updated that factual problem with the previous post. Aaron, what the hell is going on here?
Well, where do you start, Michael? We could talk about the manufacture of consent. We can talk about the British deep state. The person that wrote this article is a former UK military officer. I mean, it's kind of remarkable. It's kind of remarkable. If you look at the Israeli nuclear program, great book on this. I mentioned it on Tuesday. The Samson Option, written by Seymour Hersh in 1991, talks about the development of the Israeli nuclear program at Dimona with the French, really right after the 1940s. It gets going early 1950s. There is a ton of evidence that they have nuclear weapons, Michael, not least the Vela incident, VELA, of 1979. That was a nuclear test, we think, jointly conducted between the French and the Israelis. There were two Israeli warships nearby. There is just a ton of evidence. So the idea that we don't know. And Israel, obviously, as well, has had intercontinental ballistic missiles, I think, since 2011. Prior to that, it would have used F-15s, F-16s. So it has delivery mechanisms one would historically associate with the bomb. So this was just low information slop at best. I think actually disinformation at worst. I personally think it's the latter. Why is there a former military officer working in the BBC writing little précis about whether or not Israel has nuclear weapons, saying enrichment at 60%, and not even saying the facts? You have a nuclear capability under these conditions. Okay, well, has Israel met them? Right? Okay, you might say we can't 100% confirm warheads. Well, okay, fine. But we know they have the F-15s. We know they have the ICBMs. We know they've been developing nuclear technology for 70 years. The Dimona nuclear plant is in the Negev desert, near where Ben Gurion used to live. He kind of retired out there. So this is very well documented. And actually, there's a ton of correspondence between various figures within Israeli civil society, politicians, American Jews as well, who were giving money to this enterprise in the early 50s. And they use the most elliptical language. They use the word like the enterprise, the big idea, the project. We also know that huge numbers of Israeli nuclear scientists were working in France in the early 1950s. Like, why were they all going to France? Why were there thousands of French technicians? And we know this because there were U-2 spy planes going over and getting all of this stuff for the Americans. Why were there thousands of French technicians in the Negev desert in the late 50s? What were they doing there? Maybe they were just having fun, why were there thousands of French families based at Beersheba? What were they doing? Grow up, be an adult. We know what they were doing. They were helping the Israelis develop a nuclear technology, but also nuclear weapons. It's disinformation. A lot of the BBC, Michael, and its political coverage, it exists to pacify the British public, to keep us stupid. And it's not just about disinformation, which this is, I think. It's also about just having a level of public conversation which is really, really low. We saw Tucker Carlson a few days ago having a really high information conversation with Ted Cruz or with Steve Bannon, having a really high level conversation. Like, we have certain assumptions, certain ideas, and we're operating at this level. With the BBC, it's like down here, it's slop. You would find a better answer to that question about Israeli nuclear weapons on Wikipedia or ChatGPT or a Google search using the Google AI, right? It's slop. Why should I be compelled to pay for that? Why? Well, we believe in public service broadcasting. I'm sorry. On international relations, a lot of the time, not all the time, there's some magnificent original news gathering by the BBC. Some. But for stuff like this, for the journalists based in London, putting stuff on BBC Online, going on BBC Newsnight, it's shit. It's slop. Sorry, we don't need it. I would even go as far to say, Michael, as I would get rid of the BBC Online. Don't think there should be a BBC Online website. BBC Online has about 80%, 75% of UK online news market share. Really low cost of entry to doing online news. Give that money instead to local papers, local media organizations around this country as a form of subsidy like they do in Norway. Let them do news gathering at a local level rather than paying a former military officer money to write slop, which is disinformation. And even disinformation is inaccurate because he was wrong about enrichment.
Yeah, I suppose I more on the side of, I think it's good we had the BBC, but we should call it out when it's wrong. And I think when it comes to a foreign policy issue like this, it is especially wrong. I mean, all you have to do is watch that video of Andrew Marr sort of saying how Tony Blair is a bigger figure because Saddam Hussein has fallen, and now all of the people who criticize the Iraq war have to go silent. Obviously, there are big problems with that institution. But I suppose the Tucker Carlson point is Tucker Carlson spreads a lot of more disinformation than the BBC, right? Sometimes he asks the right questions and gets an interesting answer, but he also will spread information that just has absolutely no relation to the truth whatsoever. So personally, I'm in favor of having a BBC, but I think we should hold it to account. I do like the idea of funding local journalism, but I think we can probably do both. Do you want to come back quickly on that?
Well, it's called the British Broadcasting Corporation, Michael. It does radio and television. That's really hard to do, really expensive. Do that. Why does it have to have this website which just balloons and balloons and balloons? Now Laura Kuenssberg has a newsletter. Why am I paying for Laura Kuenssberg to have a newsletter? It's called the BBC. It's about broadcast. It's not the British Everything Corporation. So I think it strangles innovation at a local level. We're neglecting local news gathering. We should be paying for that. £1 billion a year, Michael, £1 billion a year would transform local news gathering in this country. It would transform how we conduct local politics in this country. A lot of crap would be coming to the surface. Decisions would be a hell of a lot better as a result. But instead, our mindset about public service journalism is I will pay for slop. And by the way, we do disagree about this. When it comes to foreign policy, Michael, and the decisions made by Westminster governments with regards to foreign policy and what is our perceived national interest, the BBC is crap. The BBC is crap. I would far sooner read the FT, the Economist. It's crap. It's low info slop. In terms of on the ground in broadcast, going into somewhere like the West Bank or Iran or to Lebanon, Jeremy Bowen, for instance, yes, that's very good. That is very good. But that's not most of the organization. That is not most of the organization. I wish it was. Fund more of that stuff. But there is an ideological function for the BBC when it comes to foreign policy choices by our governments. We've seen them for a very long time. It's not a new idea. How many people, Michael, has the BBC platformed in the last week saying, I'm somebody who's quite sensible, I'm quite thoughtful. I think that Israel and the Americans and the Brits have got this completely wrong in Iran. I've not seen a single person being platformed that says that.
But I've heard. I mean, I think their reporting over the past week has been bad, but I have heard that. There was the woman from the Crisis Group. I mean, it was a bad segment, but I think that's not quite true. I suppose again on the BBC, my issue with you is you say we can cut all this really cheap stuff. The BBC. Laura Kuenssberg's newsletter doesn't cost much money. I'm not going to read it. I think it's probably crap, but that's super cheap. So I think if you cut that stuff, that's not actually going to free up much money to go to local journalism.
That's not my point. No. That is not to save the money, Michael. The point is we have this huge behemoth and it's strangling innovation at a local level. I don't need to fund the BBC to do newsletters, right? Politico can do newsletters, right? What's really expensive is paying for broadcast journalists to go into the West Bank, to go into Lebanon, to go into Iraq. That's really expensive. I'm happy to pay for that. That's really, really important. Her having a newsletter is not important. So there's two things here, Michael. We can do stuff to save money. I'm not suggesting that Laura Kuenssberg not having a newsletter is going to save money.
But where do you save the money then?
No, that's damaging for a different reason, as it strangles innovation and proper news gathering by other people. Where I would save money is I'd get rid of BBC Online. I'd get rid of it. I'd literally get rid of it. Fund broadcast original news gathering for radio and TV. Do that really well. Do that better than anybody in the world. That's where the BBC adds value. It doesn't add value by slop online. It doesn't.
I mean, I think it's helpful to have some news sites where people can think this isn't completely batshit. Obviously,
The Guardian. The Guardian's free. The Guardian's free. What? Why? The Guardian's free.
Yeah, but the Guardian, the Guardian's only ever going to be read by people who see themselves as liberal, left-leaning people, isn't it? Because
Novara Media,
it's seen as partisan. Well, Novara, I don't think people should replace looking at the BBC with Novara Media. I think in an age where you have sort of like a very polarized society where you have billionaires who can just buy the Washington Post, it's good to have one taxpayer-funded news outlet, which includes online, which when it's wrong, we can critique it instead of saying, oh God, I wish Jeff Bezos hadn't bought it.
Michael, the standard of journalism at the Washington Post is head and shoulders above the BBC. What are you talking about? I just spoke to Michael Lewis. The essays in the most recent book published by Michael Lewis about public service in the United States and civil servants. The journalism in there is up there with the London Review of Books. It's better than any non-fiction in this country right now. I think a lot of Brits, Michael, like yourself, who are defending the BBC, you're really misguided actually about the caliber of journalism being done by the BBC in an international context. Compare it to the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times in terms of original news gathering for online. It's shit. Or the FT, it's shit. It's dross. I don't know what you're talking about. They can do very good broadcast radio and TV journalism. Of course they're good at it. They've been doing it for 80 years. That's what they're good at. Focus on what you're good at. Instead, we're getting infinity online news products, podcasts, newsletters. I don't want that shit.
Well, the podcasts are good. Lots of the BBC podcasts are good, and also so their total budget is 4.5 billion. Their BBC Online budget is 239 million. So that's a small proportion, isn't it? Is that about 5% of their budget? So
no, it's not.
No,
it's a bit more, but go on. It's a bit more.
Yeah, 7%. 7.5%. All right. So it's about 7.5%. So I feel like you're getting in a bit of getting yourself a bit angry that 7% of their budget is being spent on a website, which lots of people use, where some of the articles are a bit shit. But it is also a bit of a reference point that people can use to say, oh, is this actually true? I know that this organization is real and not bought by Jeff Bezos.
Michael, the question is, okay, are the British public highly informed about the issues that matter? I just don't think they are. And where they are highly informed,
but are
by
the American
consuming,
public highly informed about the issues that matters? They have
well,
the Washington Post, they have the New York
do you know where it
Times.
is?
But actually, it would be helpful if they had this big website that everyone can go to find out a base level reality.
Well, no, but we've just literally covered a story, Michael, where that wasn't being conveyed. It was complete bullshit.
Yeah, so we found one story where it's not being conveyed, and we can critique them for it. Obviously, there's more than one, but you could do this on so many things. All right, we should move on. We need to move on. We need to move on.
Michael. I want to finish with this. Norway, where I'm saying we should adopt their model of funding local journalism. Norway has a subsidy for local newspapers. Would you like to know, of all the countries in the OECD, what country is the most willing to pay for news?
Norway,
the country that subsidizes local media, because people engage with media every single day, which is actually looking at the problems they encounter when they walk out the front door. That's what we should be doing. This nonsense. We're no longer this imperial global superpower, the BBC in London, £1 billion. Bullshit. It's bullshit. You're good at TV, you're good at radio, stick with that. Cut the crap, cut the newsletters, cut the podcasts.
Okay.